I'm hitting OK.
We're good.
All right. Thanks so much to you all for participating in this reflection on the Venezuelan national security question as we are embarking.
Okay.
Whoop,
We're good.
are we good? All right. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us for this reflections on the implications of U.S. intervention in Venezuela for Brazil and Latin America. Perhaps we had no idea that we were going to be in a war with Iran. Otherwise, we might have made it a little earlier. But be that as it may, just yesterday, the U.S. embarked on a joint program with special ops with the Ecuadorian military to deal with the questions of drug production and transport and illegal mining. And if you look at the question of the national security strategy, you'll see that the Monroe Doctrine is back in high relief. So for some who knew the Cold War, this has a little throwback in the forms of the days of the Condor. But in any case, what we need to think about is what are the implications of the intervention in Venezuela in light of the national security doctrine, and also in terms of the Brazilian past and its future in light of these new changing geopolitics. I'm going to pass this to Brian Pitts, our Associate Director, who will introduce Coronel Paulo Filho, getting his doctorate in international relations and has been a major thinker on these questions. So I turn it to Brian.
Thank you, Susanna, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I think this is really a great opportunity for us here in the Center for Brazilian Studies because it's not very often we get the opportunity to hear somebody speak who has like not only the expertise of a scholar, but also expertise in like the actual application of policy and military strategy. And so it's really great to have Coronel Pablo Filho with us today. He's a reserve officer in the Brazilian Army and a specialist in military history. Um, uh, his degree in military history from the Universidade do Sul de Santa Catarina, Unisul, and also holds a master's in military operations from the Escola de Comando Estado-Maior do Exército, or in English, the Army Command and General Staff College, as well as a master's in defense and strategic studies from the National Defense University of the People's Republic of China. He is currently a PhD candidate in international relations at the Universidade de Brasília, where his research focuses on China's grand strategy in the People's Liberation Army. He's also an analyst at the Army Center for Strategic Studies and an active participant in public debates regarding strategy and geopolitics, like the discussion that we're going to have today. He's going to talk for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to have a bit of a discussion between Susanna and Paulo and myself, and then we also invite your questions from the audience, which can be submitted using the Q&A feature. Paulo, take it away.
Thank you so much, Brian. Thank you so much, Professor Susanna. It's truly an honor to be here with you today, even if virtually at the University of California, Los Angeles. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Professor Susanna again, to Brian Pitts, and to the department for the invitation and for the opportunity to engage with such a distinguished academic community. My objective will be to present relevant aspects of the Venezuelan crisis and its main repercussions for Brazil and Latin America. Allow me to briefly introduce myself. My name is Paulo Roberto da Silva Gomes Filho. I am a retired Brazilian Army Colonel, currently serving as a researcher at the Brazilian Army's Strategic Studies Center. I'm also a doctoral candidate in international relations at the University of Brasilia, where my research focuses on grand strategy, military transformation, and contemporary great power competition, particularly in relation to China and the Indo-Pacific. I speak to you from a Brazilian perspective. That is, from the vantage point of a country that shares borders, economic ties, and strategic concerns with Venezuela, while simultaneously navigating its relationships with both United States and China. My goal today is not to advocate for a particular policy position, but rather to offer a strategic analysis of recent developments and to explore their implications for hemispheric order, sovereignty, and regional stability. Thank you again for the invitation. Let us begin with a question. What would you say if, being a South American citizen, tomorrow morning you opened the news and read that the United States had captured the sitting president of a country, transferred him to New York, and declared that Washington would temporarily govern the country until a transition could be arranged? Would you call it counterterrorism, regime change, enforcement of international law, or a return to 19th century hemispheric geopolitics? Now imagine that this country is not across the ocean. It shares borders with Brazil. It sits on some of the largest oil reserves in the world. It has deep economic ties with China. And more than 7 million of its citizens have already fled. The country, of course, is Venezuela. I believe that, seeing the events from this perspective, you would be, like me, concerned. The operation I will discuss today, Operation Absolute Resolve, represents more than a tactical military action. It signals something much larger, a structural shift in how the United States defines security in the Western Hemisphere. For decades after Cold War, Latin America was often treated in Washington as a secondary theater. United States strategic attention was elsewhere: the Middle East, Western Europe, the Indo-Pacific. But in recent United States strategy documents, something has changed. The Western Hemisphere is no longer peripheral, it's central. Drug trafficking is no longer framed merely as a criminal matter, it is framed as narco-terrorism. Migration is no longer treated primarily as a humanitarian or economic issue. It is framed as national security threat. And great power competition, especially with China, is no longer confined to the South China Sea or Taiwan. It is now openly acknowledged in Latin America. What we are witnessing is not just a Venezuelan crisis. From a Brazilian perspective, and I will speak from that vantage point, this is a profound transformation. Brazil has historically operated under the assumption that South America was a relatively insulated strategic space, not immune to crisis, but buffered from direct great power confrontation. The events surrounding Operation Absolute Resolve challenge this assumption. They suggest that sovereignty in the hemisphere may now be conditionally interpreted through the lens of United States strategic priorities. They also suggest that Latin America could become an active arena of United States-China competition. So today, I want to explore three core questions. What exactly happened in Venezuela and how should we interpret it strategically? What does this operation reveal about the United States' grand strategy in the Western Hemisphere? What are the implications for regional actors, particularly Brazil? Because if this episode marks a precedent, what we might call the Venezuela precedent, then the strategic landscape of the Americas has entered a new phase, and that deserves careful analysis. On January 3rd, 2026, in a limited military action named Operation Absolute Resolve, United States Army Special Forces, supported by a robust naval and air task force that had been positioned for months off Venezuelan Caribbean coast, neutralized the presidential security perimeter and captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife Cilia Flores. The couple was immediately transported to United States territory, where they appeared before a federal court in New York City for a custody hearing. They were ordered detained pending trial on charges including narco-terrorism, weapons possession, and conspiracy. United States prosecutors accused them and their allies of transforming Venezuelan state institutions into a corruption network fueled by narcotics trafficking for personal benefit. Notes the sequencing: capture, rapid transfer, immediate court appearance. This is not just military action, it's also legal strategy and political theater. The courtroom becomes part of the message, domestically and internationally, about legitimacy and authority. Nicolas Maduro, born in 1962, had governed Venezuela since 2013, when he assumed office following the death of Hugo Chavez. He was re-elected in 2018. His administration was marked by increasing authoritarianism, repeated attempts by the opposition to remove him from office, and growing international pressure, particularly from the United States, which had formally charged him with drug-related crimes in 2020. In 2024, Maduro claimed another electoral victory, widely contested domestically and internationally, due to substantial evidence of fraud. Several countries, including Brazil, declined to formally recognize the result. Political and institutional deterioration deepened. Meanwhile, Venezuela's prolonged economic, political, and social crisis produced one of the largest displacement crises in the world. By November 2025, more than 6.9 million Venezuelans had left the country. Colombia, Peru, and Chile became primary destinations. By late 2025, over 700,000 Venezuelans has entered Brazil. From a strategic standpoint, prolonged institutional decay produces a particular kind of vulnerability. Not only military weakness, but brittleness, weak counterintelligence, politicized security force, and fragmented command structures. Those conditions create opportunities for a high-precision operation with relatively small footprint. It was within this context that Operation Absolute Resolve took place. The operation occurred under the broader umbrella of Operation Southern Spear, a US military campaign designed to detect, disrupt, and degrade transnational maritime criminal networks. Under new legal framing, certain Latin America criminal organizations were designed as terrorist organizations, making them, in US legal terms, subject to lethal military targeting. To execute Southern Spear, United States Southern Command concentrated a major naval and air presence in Caribbean, led by the aircraft carrier USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group and USS Iwo Jima Amphibious Red Group. Approximately 15,000 personnel, dozens of warships, and over 100 aircraft were deployed near Venezuela. Why assemble such a large naval air package for what is described as counter crime? Because naval presence does three things. It enables surveillance, it offers rapid strike options, and it signals resolve. It's a coercive instrument even when shots are not fired. Tensions escalated beginning September 2nd, 2025, when United States forces struck a boat allegedly transporting narcotics from Venezuela to United States territory. Between September and now, 44 vessels were destroyed in the Caribbean and Pacific, resulting 150 fatalities. This is an escalation ladder at sea. Each attack normalizes the next. The political threshold moves. What sounded extraordinary in September becomes routine by January. In addition to capturing Maduro, the United States initiated a selective naval interdiction campaign targeting vessels belonging to what it described as Venezuelans' shadow fleet, tankers allegedly transporting Venezuelan oil to countries under United States sanctions, including Cuba and Iran. By late January, 7 tankers had been seized. Following Maduro's arrest, President Trump declared in a press conference that the United States would govern the country until conditions allowed for a safe and orderly transition. He also signaled alignment between the new Venezuelan government and the United States energy interests. Subsequent public statements and social media posts suggests a form of political tutelage over Venezuela. In the remainder of this lecture, I will analyze the strategic logic behind these operations and discuss their implications, particularly for Brazil and for regional military planning. The United States' actions were not isolated events. They reflected a strategic shift formally articulated in 2025 National Security Strategy and 2026 National Defense Strategy. Both documents reassert the Western Hemisphere as a priority theater. Strategy documents matter because they reveal prioritization. They are not just rhetoric. They guide budgets, force posture, and bureaucratic incentives. When documents elevate the hemisphere, agencies reorient accordingly. The 2025 National Security Strategy explicitly states that the United States will reaffirm and reinforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere and deny hemispheric competitors the ability to position threatening capabilities in the region. In its simplest form, the Monroe Doctrine asserts that extra-hemispheric powers should not dominate the Americas. What changes over time is how that idea is operationalized through diplomacy, economic instruments, covert action, or as in this case, over military pressure under new legal framing. What some analysts have labeled the Trump corollary, the Monroe Doctrine rests on three pillars: rejecting extra-hemispheric great power presence in the Americas, asserting a right to unilateral intervention to defend United States interests, relocating critical supply chains, energy, minerals, industry to the Western Hemisphere. Think of each pillar as a policy engine. Exclusion targets external powers, China most of all. Unilateral intervention lowers the political threshold for action. Supply chain relocation connects security to industrial policy, energy, minerals, and infrastructure. Venezuela sits at the intersection of all three. In this framework, Venezuela was perceived not merely as a failing state, but as a platform for Chinese economic and geopolitical penetration in Latin America. Thus, Operation Absolute Resolve also served the National Defense Strategy's mandate to reduce the influence of rival extra-regional powers. At the regional level, the implications are profound. The United States has designed numerous criminal organizations across Latin America as terrorist entities, including groups in Colombia, Peru, Venezuela, Mexico, Haiti, Ecuador, and other countries in Central America. The precedent set in Venezuela suggests that unilateral United States military action could occur in other sovereign territories under the justification of combating narco-terrorism. The sovereignty dilemma is straightforward. Who gets to decide what a terrorist is in the hemisphere? If the designation is unilateral, the enforcement may become unilateral as well. That is the precedent problem. This raises fundamental questions about sovereignty and hemispheric order. Migration policy also plays a central role. Aggressive enforcement measures within the United States, combined with visa suspensions affecting dozens of countries, including Brazil, indicate that migration is being framed as a national security issue. This is where domestic politics meets grand strategy. When migration becomes securitized, external policy follows. Pressure on orange countries, punitive measures, and sometimes coercive action justified as a border defense beyond the border. Globally, China views its economic and strategic interests in Latin America as directly challenged. Shortly after the United States National Security Strategy was released, Beijing issued a new policy paper on Latin America and Caribbean. The Chinese document outlines 44 initiatives organized into 5 programs: solidarity, development, civilization, peace, and people-to-people connectivity. It proposed expanded military exchanges, cooperation in United Nations peacekeeping, counterterrorism, humanitarian assistance, and military technology trade. A policy paper is also signaling China is saying, we have a structured long-term agenda here, and we will not quietly retreat. So you began to see competing strategic narratives over the same region. We are therefore witnessing not merely a Venezuelan crisis, but an emerging arena of great power competition in Western Hemisphere. Competition can show up through ports, energy contracts, telecom infrastructure, military exchanges, sanctions, and legal disputes. The hemisphere becomes a chessboard, not because countries want it, but because external powers treat it that way. For Brazil, this transformation is not abstract. Brazil shares a long border with Venezuela. It hosts a significant Venezuelan migrants population. It maintains economic ties with both the United States and China. Brazil challenges a classic middle power strategy. Avoid being forced into a binary choices while managing direct spillovers. Geography limits neutrality. Borders and migration flows make Venezuela a permanent Brazilian security concern. The Venezuela precedent introduces new strategic variables. The possibility of unilateral intervention in the region, the reframing of criminal organizations as terrorist entities, increased militarization of maritime security, heightened information, illegal warfare dynamics. The broader lesson is not about Venezuela alone. It is about adaptation to a shifting hemispheric order. The United States intervention in Venezuela should not be interpreted as one-off tactical event. It reflects a structural shift in United States strategic posture toward the Western Hemisphere. Under the reassertion of the Monroe Doctrine, sovereignty is no longer treated as an absolute constraint. Instead, it becomes conditioned by United States perception of threat, alignment, and strategic utility. The combination of unilateral force, legal reframing of criminal actors as terrorists, and intensified great power rivalry creates a more unstable and coercive regional environment. For Brazil and for the region as a whole, the challenge is not to react to a single episode, but to recognize that the hemispheric strategic environment now operates under new premises. Strategic autonomy will require anticipation, preparedness, deterrence, and intellectual adaptation. And that, ultimately, is the central strategic question facing South America in this emerging arena. Strategic autonomy is not a slogan. It's an institutional capacity, intelligence, joint planning, resilience in supply chains, and diplomatic channels that prevent surprises. Therefore, I thank you all once again for the invitation and for your attention, and remain available for any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Susanna, if you're talking, I think you're on mute still.
Yeah, I noticed I was. Well, that was quite a quite a presentation. I'm sort of sitting here catching my breath at its broader implications. Um, we have some questions from the chat. I think we'll start with those and then we'll continue along. Uh, the speed at which all of this transpired, of course, raises multiple questions, and also because the Ecuadorian situation follows so shortly after the Venezuelan dynamic, there are many, many questions that emerge, and also the conjunctural situations also follow along the Andean world as well as the coastal world off the Guyanas. So, why don't we start with a question? Again, thank you for this stunning presentation.
So the first question we have from the audience is from Sofia Martins. As a lot of people from Venezuela celebrated U.S. intervention. Within Brazil, many conservative people, Partido de Direita, and channels seem to perceive a possible U.S. action against Lula as good and even necessary thing. Why do you think this is, and what is the legitimacy of listening to these popular desires? And I would also add, are they popular desires? Like what segments of the Brazilian population are they that might be that might see a U.S. intervention in Brazil to remove the Workers' Party as being desirable?
Well, of course, Maduro wasn't a legitimate president. He fraud the elections in 2024. But to me, from my perspective, being a Brazilian officer, Brazilian military officer, to see a great power, in my perspective, an extra regional great power, and you put the name you want, maybe United States or China or Russia, coming to South America and extract the president and send the president to New York to the court. To me, this is a very unthinkable thing, because it's a war act. It's a military operation. Uh, Even if Maduro wasn't a legitimate president, I think the world have other means to remove him from the power. So I don't put the things in a political view. I'm not talking about left and right, conservative or progressive uh, politics. The disturbing fact is the fact of the United States put in national security strategy that Western Hemisphere is its priority. And here they will do what they want to do. And to me, this is a very disturbing thing. So I don't see the things by the lens of by political lens. I see things by the geopolitical lens, by the rule of law, by the respect to the multilateralism, the respect to the the rules that the countries choose to follow. And to me, I don't know if I could be clear in my answer. Sorry about my English.
I think I would also add just my opinion that it's striking that the segments of the Brazilian population that styles itself as being the most patriotic, the far right in Brazil, would also be the one that has people arguing that U.S. intervention in Brazil would be a good thing, right? That seems to me like a bit of a contradiction.
It's a great contradiction. It's a great contradiction.
We have another question from Alex Ankpati-Flen, who is an associate professor in the Department of World Arts and Cultures and Dance here at UCLA. And he asks, how does the situation regarding what happened recently with Braga Neto, Garnier, and Heleno, and so on, have an effect on Brazil's response to what's happened to Venezuela, if at all?
And these generals, Braga Neto, Heleno, and Admiral, I forgot the name, uh, they were not military anymore. They were politicians. They are politicians. And they try to to make a coup of state and they are in jail. It's everything is fine to me. Um, it's important to pay attention to one thing. Brazilian army has more than 700 military units in all the country, in great cities like São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Brasília, and in very small cities like, for example, São Luís Gonzaga in Rio Grande do Sul or Tabatinga in Amazonas. And you didn't see any military, a sergeant, a major, a colonel, or a general trying to support any kind of coup of state. So to me, it's very important make this difference. These guys, they are in jail. They are politicians. They are not military anymore. In the United States, you have many military, ex-military politicians, but the guys who wear uniform, they didn't try to do to enforce a coup of stat.
Yeah, I guess the point, right, is that just because a member of the military is in politics does not mean that the military is involved in politics.
Correct. Exactly.
Susanna, did you want to jump in with any questions? We have a
Yeah,
couple.
I'm very worried about how this plays out for Amazonia. I'm an Amazon specialist, Paulo, and one of the things that is worrisome at this moment is that there's real problems in governance throughout all the Pan-Amazonian states. There really isn't very much by way of state presence. There's some military people at the borders, but not really very much. And what I worry about now is something that might unfold a little bit like the war on drugs in Colombia, where it fires up internal civil discord, and also that there's a dynamic of extraordinary resource plunder, not just for questions of rare earths, but gold just hit $5,300 an ounce. So there's plenty of incentive for people to go in to illegal mining at this moment. And if while it if you look at the Ecuador statements, it was not just about illegal drugs, it was also illegal mining, which I assume takes on the question of garimpos, gold, what we call in here wildcat mining or informal mining. I'm curious if you have some thoughts about this because it is a place that is has very weak governance, lack of presence, and also is how shall we say it's rife with clandestine economies. So I'm curious what you think, and I worry a great deal about thoughtless intervention on the part of the United States within Amazonia.
Do you know Pacaraima in Roraima, Professor, in border between Brazil and Venezuela? Do you
Uh-huh.
know? My son is a lieutenant there in the special platoon in Pacaraima just
Well,
now.
you must be both chewing your nails a little bit.
Yes, he is in. He constantly operates uh, looking for this kind of problem you had mentioned, illegal mining, for example. So the Amazon is a very huge problem. It's a very huge region, and you are right. We have a very few presence of the state in many cities in Amazon. The presence of state is only the army presence. You don't
Mhm.
have uh, any other agency, state agency in these cities. So we're trying to manage this problem with our resources, and our resources are a few resources. No? I
Mhm.
think this government is trying to make more attention uh, to the environment problems and to deal with the problem of the fire in Amazon forest, with illegal mining and the drug trafficking. We are concerned because if the Venezuela gangs cannot send the drugs to Europe because they don't send drugs to United States, very few uh, proportion, only 10% of the drugs that go out of Venezuela and goes to United States. The most goes to Europe. But if they cannot operate because the United States is pressuring them, so they they can imagine to look for new routes, and they
Mhm.
can decide to use the Amazon route by the Amazon River. So this is very concerning for us. I don't have question. I don't have answer for you, Professor, because we are trying to do our best in country, but it's a very huge
Huge area.
space to take care. You know, you in the United States have the border with Mexico, and a very little border if you compare with the borders of the Amazon forest, and you cannot solve the problem. You can imagine the difficulties the Brazil has to manage with this problem.
Actually, there's a few more questions coming in the chat as well, but before I get, or in the Q&A, I wanted to get to a question that I have as well, if that's okay. And this one touches a bit on your expertise on China as well. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, I know you've looked mainly at, right, the Brazilian and Latin American response, but looking at it from the perspective of an American, right, it's like perhaps during the Cold War, there weren't a lot of other, major powers that Latin Americans could have aligned themselves with, the exception of the Cubans aligning themselves with the Soviet Union. But today, right, if the United States pushes too hard, Latin America's largest trading partner is already China, right? In terms of closer military cooperation, China's there and China's available, right? In terms of investment in infrastructure, the Chinese are offering to do it, and then better yet, no matter what you do, China is not going to invade you. And so, for me, it looks so counterproductive from the perspective of the United States to think that this sort of big stick diplomacy is going to be effective in a period when Latin America has other choices, right? It's not just China, right? It's like um, you know, t- there's the larger BRICS coalition, right? It's not, in a multipolar world, this strategy of like trying to bludgeon Latin America into compliance with U.S. interests seems like it could be really counterproductive. And I was wondering if you could comment on that.
I agree with you. I think it's a totally insane policy because as you uh, just say, we have China is the most important commercial partner, economic partner of most of South America countries.
Yeah.
Brazil is have I think it's three times more uh, uh, economic exchanges with China compared to United States. And it's a big mistake compare this situation, the situation now with the Cold War, because in Cold War, in first place we had almost zero economic relations with the Soviet Union. And in Cold War, you had the um, political issue, you had the ideological issue, and this ideological issue are not present in today's relationship with China. China is not trying to transform Brazil or Venezuela in a communist country. China is making commercial deals with these countries. So I think this policy is, as you say, is counterproductive. It's a mistake. It's a huge mistake committed by United States. United States is pushing the countries to the Chinese arms, I think.
Wonderful, thank you. Going back to the questions from the audience, we have a question from Alexander Kipling. Olá, boa noite. Muito obrigado pela palestra. I wanted to know how this week's news about Ecuador and the fight against narco-traffickers in the country. What is Brazil's position on this?
Well, I'm not saying about in name of the Brazil. I'm talking with you in my name, only in my name. But again, I don't like this kind of thing. I cannot imagine that tomorrow I am as a military, my son, for example, could operate in under a United States operation to combat illegal mining in Amazon forest, because sovereignty is very important for us. It's very important. We can solve our own problems. And to Brazil, that we are the greatest country in South America in area. We have half of the population. We have half of all the money of the region. So we can solve our own problems, and we don't need United States help to combat drug trafficking. We could talk about collaboration, about intelligence data, about
Satellite.
satellite pictures. We can talk about that, but not about the military presence in our own territory. To me, this is a very it's unthinkable thing.
Our next question jumps a little bit away from what we've been talking about, and looking at some of the broader global implications, and goes more back on the Venezuela topic. Carla Zapato Orellana is asking, what do you think is going to happen to Maduro, especially looking at it in the context of past U.S. interventions and removals of Latin American heads of state?
Sorry, I didn't understand what will happen with Maduro.
Yes, what will happen next with Maduro?
Maduro will be judged by the United States court. This is the most wrong thing in my point of view. The regimen is the same. The vice president is in power. It's unbelievable because the two most powerful guys in Venezuela are the Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopes, and the Minister of, I don't know the name in English, Interior, is Diosdado Cabello. These two guys, the United States government, pay 20 millions and 25 millions US dollars for informations that give the capture of those two guys. So the United States Counter Command, General, I forgot the name, General the commander of United States Southern Command, had last week a meeting with these two guys. So this is unbelievable. If the general take the two guys by the arm and put in the plane and send to United States, he will earn $45 million. I'm joking, but it's a very unthinkable situation. The regime is the same regiment. The regime. Uh, Maduro goes out, but everything stays in the same way. So why did that? Why to arrest Maduro? It was only because of the oil. So it's a very concerning situation. Sorry.
Especially we can see, considering the fact that what they've been charged with, like illegal possession of a weapon or like something that has nothing to do with any of the supposed crimes that he's been accused of. Uh,
No, narco trafficking,
was he
narco
charged with narco
trafficking,
trafficking too? I thought it was just, I
and
thought
and
actually being
and
charged with was.
weapons possession.
Yes, but these two generals, Vladimir Padrino Lopes and Diosdado Cabello, they are procurados,
Wanted.
searched, wanted, uh, because they are uh, by the same um, accusation, drug trafficking and all these things. And the United States Southern Command had a meeting with these two guys because they are the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Interior. So it's unbelievable.
So the next question, I know it's based on what you just said about, speaking for yourself. I know this is one that you cannot speak for the Brazilian military, but perhaps you can speculate a little bit. Sophia Martins is asking, given the historical ties between the Brazilian military and the U.S. military, and the close collaboration that goes back, I know, at least to World War II, if not further, um, how do you have any feel for how the Brazilian military hierarchy is looking at this latest U.S. intervention in Latin America? Because you have, on the one hand, this strong collaborative relationship historically, but also very strong, nationalist feeling in the Brazilian military that I would imagine does not look kindly on U.S. interventions in Latin America. So I kind of wonder how those two, and the questions is about like kind of how those two tendencies in the military coexist.
We try to separate the guys, the military, and the policy. I have many United States military friends, many, 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 and and much of them are not very happy with these policies too. So Brazil has a very close relationship. Brazilian Army has a very close relationship with the United States Army, historical relations since World War II, and most of our weapons, equipments are made in the United States. So we need maintain this relationship, um, and we try to separate things. But of course, this new policy, it's a factor of um, to worsening the relations. It's true.
So we have another question from the audience, comes from Bill Summerhill in the Department of History here at UCLA. And he asked specifically about Joesley Batista seems to have gone into the business of shuttle diplomacy between Washington and Caracas, both before and after Maduro's capture. Is Itamaraty involved in this in any way? Is this being coordinated in any way with the Casa Civil? And he comments, this seems to be an unusual choice of interlocutor, especially given his record of political corruption.
I'm sorry, I don't know nothing about Joesley Batista, and I cannot say anything about this.
Yeah. It seemed that he certainly has not been appointed as any sort of ambassador. It certainly seems to be an informal role that he's taken on. And it was here, I was talked about a bit. I think it might have been the New York Times that had a piece on it. Susanna, did you want to jump in with any further questions or comments while we see if there's any more questions from the audience?
No, I'm good with this. There's so much to think about with all of this, and also that sort of nervous, the stomach clenching dynamic of increased insecurity, given how many that there are 9 states, Amazonian states that surround Brazil, and that the question of drugs and illegal mining are imbricated in all of them, or if not one or both, the other. So I'm very nervous about the dynamics of using more military. And again, as we began, the whole the Peruvian, the Ecuadorian, um, how shall we say, I don't want to use the term collusion, but agreements to allow armed U.S. military and intelligence personnel to operate within their borders gives me a lot of disquiet, particularly because of the dynamics of Amazonian development, its clandestine nature in many ways, and the limited state presence by virtually all the countries. So I don't know. And also a long history of civil war and guerrilla war in these areas. I worry that this will have it turn the place into one of many conflagrations, not just the ones that go with burning up forests, but also with the political conflagrations that are possible.
I agree with you, Professor, and I think the Colombia situation, especially because of the elections in next May, could be very dangerous,
Mhm.
because I think we will see a kind of pressure by the President Trump to interfere in the elections, and I don't know how the president will react to this pressure, how the guerrilla groups will react. So I'm concerned too, especially about Colombia in next months.
Well, I don't see any additional questions from the audience, and we're coming up right on an hour, which seems like a good time for me. 30 minutes of
Q&A.
explanation and 30 minutes of discussion. So, Susanna, unless you have anything else, we
No, thank you. Thank you
appreciate
all for participating. And Paulo Filho, wow, thank you so much. We had a lot of people on the internet tuning in, so it had a lot of audience, which we were worried about because we didn't know, since it's so late in the term, whether we would be able to. But you could see that there was a great deal of interest in this, and I'm sure that there will be people who will want to look at the YouTube for your concise analytics of this extraordinary structural change that's occurred just in the last month.
That's
So
right.
again, I thank you so much. It's so kind of you to help us out and help us think through this, because we hear every week it's something else. So we wander around a little bit like sort of stunned beasts. But this was so lucid and so helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. Thank you so much, Brian. It was a very great moment to me, and I'm I'm honored to be here with you. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. And everyone, thank you for attending. The next event for the Center for Brazilian Studies is next Wednesday, March 11th at 4 p.m. We're going to have Nikias Muzi of the Brazil Lab at Princeton University and Victoria Bergbauer of the Fox Center for Humanistic Inquiry at Emory University, who will be giving a talk both in person and online titled Empires of Fantasy and Fear. Unfree Migration in the Age of Emancipation. That's going to be at 2 p.m. on next Wednesday, March 11th, in person in Bunch 10383 and online as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great rest of your afternoon.